Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to What's the Point? Another fabulous guest for you today. A woman that I have had the pleasure of knowing for a lot of years. And let's say hello, Mitch Meyers.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Bill, for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Who'd have thought 30 years ago we'd be doing this, huh?
Right.
So Mitch, for the listeners' benefit, Mitch is an incredibly accomplished businesswoman. She is successful in all aspects of her life, family, personal development, but also professional. And there's a lot that goes into her getting to the point that she has. But where she is now is that she's one of the leading faces of the medical cannabis industry. And I think that's a brilliant topic, and it's one I'm very excited to get into some details with you about, Mitch.
Right.
So just give us an overview of that, if you would, please.
Well, so Bill, as you know, my background is marketing and brand development. I worked for big companies like Anheuser-Busch. I then started an advertising and promotion agency with a couple of guys in the St. Louis area. We built that over 15 years and sold it. And that was back in 2003. And I thought that I was going to retire and become Mother of the Year. And I failed at retirement. So when my kids were actually in college, they went to school in Boulder, Colorado. In 2009, medical cannabis was approved there. So being sort of a lifelong learner and nosy and hanging out, and saying, what is this new thing that is springing up? I just found myself knocking on doors of dispensaries and people that were growing the plant to understand what it was. And I live in Illinois. And so Illinois was actually passing a medical cannabis bill. And I decided I was going to throw my hat in the ring. I had spent probably a year and a half just really doing a lot of research and talking to people and trying to understand, what it was and what it wasn't. And what I now know it isn't is something that people should be afraid of. It's
right.
Something that was made illegal 85 years ago by our government. And it's really a shame because most people know that medication, the root of medication is plants. And cannabis just happens to be another one of those plants that have great medicinal value. So the more I researched, the more angry I got that this wasn't available to people now. And I thought, I'm going to get involved in this. And so I tried out, or I applied for a license and got a dispensary license in Chicago. And that basically taught me what patients were looking for and what they were treating for using cannabis, and it was pretty fascinating. So in 2015, the state of Missouri was offering 2 licenses for someone to grow and process, extract oil, and treat epilepsy patients with a high CBD strain of cannabis. So I applied for that, and I got it. And that has really been an incredible experience for me and my staff, interacting with these epilepsy patients and their families. And what I have seen a very simple oil that's prepared from the cannabis plant do in terms of stopping seizures and improving quality of life with these people is really miraculous. And so I then continued in the state of Missouri, as we were the 33rd state to approve medical cannabis. And since then, several more have come online. And so people around the country know this works. It's going to have to be something that we bring in, we force the Congress to do something about. But there's already, there's some form of it in 47 states in the country. So the tube's out of the toothpaste, or the paste is out of the toothpaste too. And
that makes a little bit more sense, right?
Yeah. And so I continue to learn every day, and we recently approved adult use in the state of Missouri. And so now I have many more licenses there. Again, I'm failing at retirement, but I can't quit. It's, I say to people, when do you ever get to be involved in the brand new industry? It's like the beginning of the internet.
Yeah, so let me just stop you there for a minute because there's so much that you said. You kind of glossed over your personal story, your professional life, if you will. So I want to touch on that a little bit more. But if nothing else, if listeners are going to click off now or finish their run or whatever they're doing, here's one thing I want to make sure that they take away from. Your success hasn't been overnight. Your success hasn't been just a godsend. Your success is the result of curiosity and hard work and dedication and persistence.
Exactly.
And that's, if nothing else, everybody, take note of that. I do love the fact that you said you failed at retirement, because that's probably one of the few things that I'm aware of that you have failed at, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So we'll come back to the world of cannabis, medicinal and otherwise, because there's a lot to talk about there, and I want to make sure people get it. But I also want people to understand what I'm going to call your pedigree and why you have been successful where you are. It starts with curiosity. It's and persistence, as I said, but there's also just a great bit of intelligence and talent involved. So you were in accounting and auditing, and probably beating your head against the wall, because I didn't know you then. But you moved into marketing at Anheuser-Busch, and that's where we first met. One thing I want to make sure everyone understands is that you said you thought you'd retire and become Mom of the Year. You'd already been named AdWeek's Advertising Woman of the Year. That's a pretty keen accomplishment there. Tell me about how that came about.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I loved working at Anheuser-Busch, but it was a challenge actually getting in there, because it was a pretty male locker room back in the early 80s when I did get the job. And so I think that the marketing media had an eye on me, trying to see, is she going to do a good job? Is she going to flub up? And, I grew up in a family of boys. I was the wide receiver on our football team. So boys never scared me. I love them. I love boys. I love men. And I found that I was able to, be friendly enough and smart enough to get a seat at the table ultimately. And I just loved marketing. I would say my firstborn child was Spuds MacKenzie on the Bud Light brand. So I just refused to be ignored, and, people had to put up with me and deal with me. And then I had this great opportunity after Anheuser-Busch to do something entrepreneurial. And
okay, hold on there, just because I just want to make sure. There's a lot of people listening that don't have quite the age on them that I do, and that you're closing in on. If you aren't familiar with Spuds MacKenzie, go to Google and Google Spuds MacKenzie. There's some brilliant work that Mitch was a part of and helped create this character. But I also want to say that the reason I wanted to touch base on that is exactly the point you made, and I'm glad you brought it up and I didn't have to prompt you. And it's very simply this. You were highly successful in a field that wasn't your first effort, but more importantly, as a female in a very male-dominant, and I worked there, I could see it from the male-dominant side.
Right.
I think that's another great lesson that people need to listen to. Females, you can do it. Males, open your eyes and accept the talent that's there.
Exactly.
Just embrace it and quit fighting it.
Exactly right.
So,
and my immediate boss, Bob Guggenauer, was a prince. And,
yeah.
he always said, women work harder than men. So I'm happy to have him on my team. And a funny story, Bill, I actually got that Bud Light job. There were a lot of people applying for it, a lot of guys. But the reason Bob wanted me to have that job was because of my accounting and finance background. Because, as you know, we dealt with big budgets, and Bud Light was highly visible, and he really wanted somebody that knew how to manage the funds and not run over budget.
That's something I wasn't aware of, but that certainly is interesting. And yeah, Bob Guggenauer is one of the great people I've met in my life, much less just at Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah, tremendous.
So you moved on, and Zipatoni was born.
Right.
Tell us about that.
So Zipatoni was, just a handful of people at the time, and Anheuser-Busch was kind enough to let us continue to work with them because, I had some good experience. But we started building our business outside of AB, and we had Snapple in New York, and we had Motorola in Chicago, and we had an ice cream client in San Francisco. And what I learned was, the big 1,000-pound gorilla in our shop, Anheuser-Busch, was taking most of our resources and delivering a very small percentage of our profit. And a lot of these other companies were paying us much more and respecting our knowledge. So we literally started building our business beyond St. Louis and beyond, AB, and ultimately ended up with 5 offices around the country. We were about $45 million in top line revenue annually. And those are like project to project. You're only as good as your last project. So better be good. So we built our company to 350 employees, and then we sold it to a very large advertising conglomerate.
And that's when you embarked on the next career, the first one that you failed at, and that's being retired.
Right. And you know what? I loved it. I was really good at it. I loved it. But when this kind of got into my vision, I was like, I just could not stop researching. And, about this time, Sanjay Gupta actually did a documentary on CNN. It was called Weed One. Now, he is a neurosurgeon, now he's a media personality. But I really think that broad-based media exposure of a little girl, being not cured, but really helped with her epilepsy with this strain of cannabis out of Colorado, it turned everyone's head. It's like, oh my God, how can you demonize this? Look what this is doing for this child. So he said in that documentary, we have systematically been lied to by our government to think that there's no medical benefit to cannabis. There is. And you know what? The federal government patented cannabinoids in 1999 because they know it works. So, that just kind of got me aggravated, and I kept going after it. I didn't have
good for you.
to fight anymore, I guess.
Well, I was going to say good for you, and not just good for you and your business, but good for tens of thousands, if not more. One thing that I want to touch base on now, because I think it's a logical step from what you talked about, the demonization of cannabis and marijuana. Talk to me about the differentiation between medicinal cannabis and recreational marijuana use. Because I think that's at the core of most people's concern.
Exactly. And you know what, Bill? I was not a cannabis kid growing up. I was a just say no to drugs kid and a rule follower. So I didn't have it in my purview. So I really came at this looking at the medical component of it, and I found it. I found that it works. So the cannabis plant, there are probably 2,000 strains that exist around the world, and all of those strains have a different makeup. So all of them will have THC, which is the molecule that, gets you high. They will have some CBD, which is a non-psychoactive molecule, and they have other cannabinoids, CBN, which is good for sleep, CBG, which is an antibacterial. So understanding the makeup of that plant is how you can really help people either with symptoms that they're trying to mitigate or actually, tamp down. It really affects, we have an endocannabinoid system in the human body. That was not discovered until 1999. So honestly, the doctors who have said there's no medical value weren't taught this in med school, the older docs. The younger people are now being taught we have this system in our body and we produce cannabinoids. And when we have a deficiency, you can use plant-based cannabinoids to address that. So that
Okay,
is,
let me stop you just real quickly. Sorry to interrupt, but I think this is important for me and probably for many of the listeners. Help me understand what is a
so
cannabinoid.
a cannabinoid is basically some of the molecules that are in the plant. So that THC was discovered by an Israeli scientist in the 60s, probably. He mapped that genetic component and said, this is what gives you a psychoactive effect. But he didn't know why until the system in our body was discovered. So plants have terpenes in them, and terpenes are things that flavonoids, lipids, chlorophyll, fats, cannabinoids, and they have terpenes. And every plant has a terpene. So if you think about a pine tree and you think of that smell, that's pinene. If you think of lavender, lavender has linalool, which is a terpene. And each of those terpenes have effects for plants in the wild. They either attract pollinators or they detract predators. And in the human body, they have effects. So linalool, if you have a cannabis plant that's high in linalool, that's going to be relaxing and help you sleep. If you have limonene, which lemons and limes have, that's going to be more uplifting and brightening. So each of those terpenes, understanding their effects, and you know, all the natural oils company know this. They sell the heck out of terpenes, you know, by themselves. So now this cannabis plant is giving this to us, you know, and if you combine it all together, they call it an entourage effect. And your body likes to see that whole plant.
Okay. I think I understand it a little bit more, but again, a bigger tip of the hat to you in your research and your learning, because that's not something you read a paragraph about and understood it.
No, I mean,
So,
I have been to conferences at Harvard where
yeah,
I have seen scientists from all over the world, and the research they're doing with cannabis is mind blowing. Now, we don't get that in the US because it's federally illegal and you can't get researchers to work with you. I'm
yeah.
just now getting SLU to work with me on CBD because that is federally legal.
Okay.
But we're
For
behind,
our listeners' benefit, SLU is St. Louis University, a
right,
very prestigious university here in St. Louis.
right.
Go ahead, sorry.
So, you know, this is all just starting in the US. Now that we're starting to get cannabis legalized, you now have medical institutions that are, you know, willing to take the risk or find private funders to help. And you're seeing things, I mean, epilepsy is kind of a proven thing, but now people are working for cancer to try to, you know, do cell death, apoptosis with cannabis. Autism, there's a huge study going on in Israel with autistic patients. I could tell you just, you know, mind blowing stories about little kids with, you know, having 300 seizures a day that we've pretty much stopped their seizure activity with a simple oil. It's exciting, you know, it's healthcare and it's new medicine. And so many people are trying to get off of pharmaceuticals because of the side effects, you know, or the concern with opioids, for example. You know, you can't die from taking cannabis, and that's not guaranteed with some of the other, you know, pharmaceutical preparations.
Well, I would venture to say that Big Pharma has not done itself any favors, and more so hasn't done the public many
Right.
favors with their approach to how they market and how they
Right.
imply usage. But I'll stay away from that rabbit hole at this point. I do want to get back quickly just to the difference, because this is very important to me personally. The difference between medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis, and how recreational, which has the THC in it, that's how I'm defining it, has been prescribed by doctors as medicinal. So that fine line between THC recreational versus THC, quote on air quotes if you're watching on YouTube, THC medicinal versus the THC out of it and just the CBD primary focus. How does all that work? Because I just really think that helps prolong and extend the confusion over the benefits.
Okay, so, the cannabis plant is the cannabis plant.
Right.
And somebody put it on planet Earth for a reason. And we really should have been studying that plant and its compounds and components. And I think what happened when cannabis was made illegal, what happens is you drive people underground into a black market situation. And so they're trying to grow this plant in a small confined place. And so what they did was try to breed up the amount of THC in a plant so that it had more of a psychoactive component. And people were using it for a lot of different things. California's had medical approved for 22 years. And it basically got started with the AIDS epidemic out there, and nurses were taking cannabis and putting it in brownies, trying to get people to be able to take their medication and keep their strength up and all that kind of stuff. And that's how it got started medically. Well, it has since marched across the country, and Missouri's a good example. We had medical cannabis for 2 years in the state. What that meant was you had to have one of 9 medical conditions to be able to get a doctor to prove a card for you to be able to buy medical cannabis. So cancer, epilepsy, all kinds of neurological issues, and you could get a card. But once the public passed the latest law that if you're 21 or older, you can buy it, the difference in my dispensary is if we have a medical patient, they present that medical card when they come in, and we have information we've kept on them in a HIPAA compliant fashion that we know what they're treating for. We have so many veterans with PTSD. We have people that don't want to be on opioids anymore. And for pain relief, our staff needs to understand what's the best strain, what's the best way to consume that. Now, people do come in and want it for a social lubricant. Just like, me going out and get a glass of wine, somebody might want to smoke a vape pen or eat a gummy. People do it to relax. So, there is both components, and, I don't think that's going to change. I think that long term, you'll see this industry go down 2 paths. I think pharmaceutical industry will ultimately get their hands on it. And I also think there'll be a social, the liquor guys or the cigarette people or the beer companies will take the social aspect.
Yeah. And that whole aspect, in my opinion, my uneducated opinion, so this is strictly an assumption on my part, I think that continued cloud of using it to get high and all of the negative stuff that's been spewed about that through the years of crime and criminal and all the stuff that the fear mongers put out, it's going to take a while for that to cycle through and for people to start to recognize and accept the benefit.
It totally is, but I can see it. You and I grew up where alcohol was our drug of choice, right? And there was a time before Prohibition when it had the same stigma. So it takes a couple of generations. My kids are in their 30s. They live in Colorado. They have grown up with cannabis being there, and it's normalized to them. It's not crazy when you go to a party and somebody pulls out a vape pen. It's just like somebody bringing a 6-pack of something or a bottle of wine. So it's just incorporated sensibly, into their lives. And, people, I think, are happy to be able to have access to it, so they're not just, crazy nuts. And as I said, we have so many bigger problems with fentanyl-laced products, that if somebody can get cannabis and it's regulated and tested, and exactly how strong it is because the test results are on it, that's a much saner way, for the future.
100%. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. You talked about us growing up with alcohol being our drug of choice. I chose a few others along the way.
You're sampling.
So let's get specific to you and in particular your company, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, Mitch, both from the product itself, but also in the industry itself. So let's focus in on your company, which is called Beleaf, 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 and expand a little bit on that, the benefits that your company is bringing, and also some of the opportunities that your company and the industry presents.
So again, in Missouri, we were one of two suppliers that were just growing CBD and treating epilepsy patients. And it was a very small operation. It was difficult to get neurologists involved because they're involved with big hospital systems. So literally, I would spend my days trying to deal with neurology departments at hospitals that would give access to these people. While that was going on, the rest of the country is starting to approve medical cannabis. And I thought if we could create a little trade association for the state of Missouri that could help bring in a medical cannabis bill, that would be great for the state. So I had a little operation and I'm growing these plants. So I was able to bring in the police, the Just Say No to Drugs people, the doctors, the lawyers, you name it. I brought everybody through my operation to say, I want you to lay eyes on this. It's the first cannabis grow in 85 years. And I want you to see that it's not scary and it's not dangerous and we're not growing plutonium here. And it just sort of amazed me how when everybody walks in and sees this simple, beautiful plant, it's like, what is there to be afraid of? And then you see the pictures on my conference room wall of these children that have been transformed since taking this. Then their eyes started to open and they started to listen. So we created this trade association, and in Missouri you can do a ballot initiative. So if you get enough people to sign a petition and get it on the ballot, then the people can vote whether they want it or not. And so that's what we did. We got it on the ballot and it was approved in 2018. So then the Department of Health has to write rules and regulations, which they did. And I put together an investment group because it was going to take money if we could get these licenses. And that was about a 6-month process to find real estate, to, write the licenses, to get the staff and everything ready, and then we make application. We had hoped we would get one of each type of license. So you can own a cultivation facility where you grow the flowers. You can own a manufacturing operation where you convert that flower into oil, and then you can turn that into edibles and vape pens and things like that. Or you can own dispensaries, which is basically retail. And so we applied for all of them, hoping we'd get one of each. And we ended up getting all 10 licenses, which was, it was great for a few minutes, but then you felt like the dog that caught the car. Like, where are we going to get enough money to do this? But we ultimately did. We patched it together. We got up and operational in 2020, the end of 2020. So we are now into our 3rd year of medical, and we just passed rec last fall, and that started being available February 3rd of this year. And it has been an outstanding program. Like, I speak a lot. Last night I was at a real estate conference. Everybody wants to know, how do they get involved? So the bankers want to know, the realtors want to know, the title companies want to know, the software, the accounting, the lawyers. For every dollar that's spent in cannabis, $3 are spent with ancillary businesses. And I mean, if I told you what I've paid my law firm in the past 10 years, you would faint. But you have to have them, and you have to have a good accounting structure around you, because these businesses are difficult. All 3 of those verticals are very, very different from one another. Cultivation it's an ag business basically. And we're growing, agricultural products indoors with really high tech lighting and racks and watering systems and nutrient protocols. Manufacturing takes chemists. So I have PhDs and chemists in chemistry working for us, formulating food products and extracting oils. And then retail is retail. So, it's really fascinating, and being able to hire the right people, get those people on the bus and in place to run these businesses, because they're very large businesses, and you can lose a lot of money as well as make a lot of money.
Well, what you just said, I think is also, everything you said is really important and very enlightening. So again, thank you for your time and for sharing your decades-long research and knowledge. But what a lot of people don't realize, and what you just outlined very succinctly, is that this is a business, and a very sophisticated business. And I think the enlightenment of you need to have a good law firm, you need to have chemists, you need to have agriculture in this case, you need to have experts in the business that you're doing, and then to polish it all off, you have to have retail. So it's a very legitimate and polished business, where a lot of people still think, I'll sell you a lid out of the trunk of my car or something. So it's a whole different deal.
You know what, Bill? It's interesting, because when I was looking, like, whenever you have to apply for a license, you have to go through the city council meetings, and you have to have zoning meetings. And many times I was in these small towns, and what I would do is go in and meet with the chief of police first to see if I had any headwinds. And I'll remember in Chicago, in one of the areas, I was sitting across from this big burly chief of police, and I started talking about cannabis and the safety, and he stopped me, and he took my hands, and he said, "Mitch, I'm not afraid of cannabis." He said, "My mother is being treated for breast cancer, and my other brother, who's not a cop, buys her cannabis to put in brownies so she can take her chemo." And I said, "Chief, I'll be glad when this is approved and your brother's not buying pot in the park from somebody that he doesn't know what's in it, including pesticides, the level of THC. I'll be so happy when you can buy a tested product." So anybody who's been touched by it, or who's had a family member that's used it successfully, the switch is flipped, right? So it's just gonna take time for everybody in Congress to say, "You know what? My sister's using this and couldn't get through her cancer treatment without it."
And that's so realistic and so practical and so compelling. But that brings in, and again, I'm very hesitant to jump and end up going down a rabbit hole. However, I think it's very important to have this discussion, and that is the influence of, in this case, Big Pharma with our national politicians. I don't care what side of the party, what side of the fence, any of that stuff doesn't matter. But what is important is the influence that Big Pharma has, in this case, over perpetuating whatever they're perpetuating, but limiting the growth of this, and continuing the horror stories and the fear mongering that's become so common.
I've learned so much about Big Pharma through this, and I've learned about clinical trials and, what they have to do, how much money they spend, blah, blah, blah. So in 2006, there is a pharmaceutical company in the UK called GW Pharmaceutical. It's a public company. They decided that they were going to grow the same CBD plant that I was growing in my warehouse in Missouri and turn it into a pharmaceutical and treat epilepsy patients. And what that means, what I've learned is pharmaceutical industries are basically taking one compound. So they find the plant that works, and they determine which compound within that plant, which is CBD in this regard, and they isolate the CBD. So that means they strip out everything else. Any trace of THC, all the other cannabinoids I told you were good, everything else the plant has, lipids, fats, chlorophyll. And so they strip all that out and create basically a synthetic CBD. They then did their clinical trials in the US and got approval to sell Epidiolex to epilepsy patients. So by this time, I'm probably treating 50 patients from Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital, and it becomes available. And, obviously my product is not something that insurance will pick up. And many of these families struggle financially just because they've had such a medically challenged family member. So I would say that on average, people would spend $3,000 a year on our oil, which was stopping seizure activity, no side effects, helping these kids get off their feeding tubes, making them be able to talk, go to school. So out comes Epidiolex, and of course the doctors are being encouraged to recommend that because perhaps your insurance will pick it up. Their prescription cost $42,000 a year. It did not, stem seizures activity as well, and they had side effects because your body doesn't recognize what's happened to it, right? They have stripped out everything but the CBD, and your endocannabinoid system recognizes all of those cannabinoids and other plant molecules. So I ended up getting all the patients back that switched over to the pharmaceutical version within 5 months of them leaving. So, it just says to me, they do this for profit reasons, right? They couldn't afford to do what I'm doing on a large scale and make the profit that they need. So they have to synthesize whatever that compound is in the plant that they think is workable. And we beat them all day long in terms of efficacy. The real plant is better.
And which is probably true in almost every case.
It's why we get these side effects from these drugs.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, the actual plant is better than anything artificial in almost every case, cannabis or celery. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It's like, don't take your food in a pill, eat your broccoli.
Yes, Mom.
And like it.
So I still, again, it's a rabbit hole but it's something that I think has to be addressed, Mitch, and that is the power and the influence of big pharma. So I'll give you a very brief scenario of a discussion I had yesterday with a very dear friend whose adult daughter, for a lot of reasons, is very much overweight and seeking to become pregnant. So it's been advised that she lose weight prior to becoming pregnant, which makes sense.
Right.
So rather than saying it's a behavioral change, they said, there's a drug out there, and it's coming under fire right now because I won't mention it, but in their advertising, which is extensive, they say, oh, by the way, some people lose up to 15 pounds. So everyone's, but to get that approved by insurance, the doctor told her patient, you have to be on this other prescription for at least 2 months before we can get your insurance company to approve this other drug. Now, a little dysfunction there, I think. But so I bring that up just so everyone listening, and I know you're aware of this, I can tell by the look on your face, but also the research you've done and the experience you've had. It's that kind of mindset that creates us having to fight such an uphill battle on so many fronts, including the benefits of medicinal cannabis.
It is. And you know what? It's purely profit driven. And those companies have made so much money that they now have the biggest lobby in the country. And that's what drives, drug policy, are the lobbyists or the pharmaceutical companies. And, honestly, Bill, I think eyes have been opened in the past 5 years with all the opioid addiction people dying from opioids, and when they can't get their hands on them, they're buying street heroin and then heroin laced with fentanyl. I can't tell you the young people I know that have had sports injuries that have gone from opioids to street fentanyl and have died. I mean, we have buried too many 26-year-olds that got hurt playing hockey. And it's, it's really, it's shameful. I mean, I work with NFL players. I work with NHL hockey players. These people tell me stories about, when they were playing football, every day after practice, they'd get a shot of tramadol and they'd get a baggie full of opioids. And some of them just basically resisted it because they hated the way it made them feel. They hated how they treated their family members, and they turned to cannabis. And, some of them got kicked off teams because they were drug tested. But now things have really changed. The NHL isn't testing anymore. The NBA doesn't test anymore. They know that cannabis is better than many of these pharmaceutical drugs. And they're having to, stop doing that because for the welfare of their players, they have to let them do what's better for them.
Yeah, so they finally have realized, excuse me, I think the leagues and the team owners perhaps have realized that, the opioids and that approach is short-term thinking and also not at all in the best interest of the human beings that are their product, if you will. So,
Right.
As far as opportunities in business for employment, that kind of thing, is there anything you can share that listeners can take themselves and or direct people they know to have a productive life in this new industry?
The last couple of years, you hear about everybody struggling to get employees. We don't struggle. We probably have 2,000 resumes at all times. Now, that's several things. As I said, people who are passionate about cannabis are so excited to work in a legalized industry, to be able to get access, to help people. I have some young kids that have developed relationships with some of our older veterans, and it is so heartwarming to see how they sort of can appreciate one another because these young kids can give them education, can suggest products that really help them feel good, that will talk to them, that will spend time with them. One of the things in our medical system is doctors don't have time to talk to you anymore. And we do. You can come into our shop and have a cup of coffee and sit in the mushy couch and ask all the questions you want. The other thing is we pay well. We pay people above hourly, wages. They get full benefits. We offer a 401k plan. It's not a fly-by-night, Cheech and Chong operation. There are places like that people just try to get in on a shoestring and don't want to spend any money. When people come to my dispensaries, they feel like they're at Nordstrom's. They can look around on the shelves and shop and ask questions and, relax in the lobby. They can learn about cannabis. So it is not a frightening experience. It's a fun, exciting new experience, actually. So we are able to get qualified employees, but like any good business, got to take care of them. You got to train, you got to appreciate them, and make them be part of the family.
And make certain that and I know you know this, so it's not like I'm trying to enlighten you, but and make sure they understand the importance of seeing the benefit to the consumer, to your customer.
Right.
And it sounds like you've got a lot of people that do that. So everyone listening right now, in the show notes, you'll be able to go to, there'll be a ton of information, but right now you people that want a job and or want to go to the Nordstrom of dispensaries, beleaf.com, right? BELEAF.com.
It's beleafco.com.
Oh, my apologies. BELEAFCO, beleafco.com.
Yes.
I appreciate your time. It's been great to kind of reconnect, but also to gain all of this new insight and for you to share not just the benefit but the excitement that it brings. I love that because this show is all about trying to help people through the story of others grasp their purpose and why, because that ignites their passion, and your passion is clearly ignited. So after auditing and marketing and agencying and jumping into medicinal cannabis and legislation and everything else, when you put it all together, you know what's coming here. Mitch, share with us from your perspective, what's the point?
The point is, keep your eyes wide open. I always think the universe is sending us messages, and if you're open to it, you can let that in and you can benefit from it, and maybe you can benefit other people. What I love about this industry, and I'll tell you, Bill, it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. I've met the most interesting people I've ever met. I never would have met them if they weren't in cannabis. And the point is, it's not something I ever thought I would get involved in, but because I'm a lifelong learner and just interested and ask questions, I found myself in the middle of it. And, people give me credit in the state of Missouri for, basically being the matriarch of cannabis in Missouri, but it's only because, I was interested, I learned, and I opened myself to, what was happening. So that's the point. Never close your eyes, never stop learning.
I love that point. I embrace that point. Stay open, because if you're not, who knows what you're going to miss. And one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to butcher it, but essentially one of the greatest barriers to knowledge and advancement is contempt prior to investigation. And I think that the cannabis industry has been a victim of contempt prior to thorough investigation for way too long. So I appreciate your efforts to bring that to light. I appreciate your time here today. And Mitch, I'm just delighted that things are going so well for you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bill. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.